This is powerful Hurricane Lee, Category 5 major hurricane, 165 miles an hour. It rapidly intensified 80 miles an hour to put it in rare territory. In fact, only 6 storms in history was able to accomplish that feat. The last one was back in 2020 with Hurricane Ada, and this is going to continue northwest bound in the days to come. The latest update from the National Hurricane Center puts it at 155 mile per hour major hurricane. You can see it's got a lot of runway to work with. It's going to be putting north of the islands, north of Puerto Rico, as well as north of the Dominican Republic, putting it out in the open waters. And these waters are very hot out here. Got a lot of runway to work with. In fact, let me show you this runway, what I'm talking about. Pretty clear, right? It's pretty clear in the path, and that's why this actually continued to maintain its strength, even actually continues to strengthen a little bit further. Back behind it, we do have another potential hurricane, which is Margot, but that's going to be well behind Lee and actually going to be lifting further north and out into the open waters. Further inland, we do have a cold front to talk about with some severe storms, but then another reinforcing shot headed into next week that's going to make significant changes with much cooler air and much wetter conditions for many. So if you are new to the channel and like detailed weather breakdowns, hit the subscribe button and you're in. You get all my daily content on this channel, and I would love to reach 200,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and you can help me get there by subscribing to the channel and following all my daily content. So let's take a look at the temperatures today, folks. This is crazy down there in Texas. That's 109. That's 111 in Wichita Falls. This is September the 8th, folks. This is the hottest, latest all time since records began back 125 years ago. You'd have to, this is insane stuff for this time of year. Luckily, this is the end of the major heat wave that's been inundating these areas for the last 2.5 months, because further to the north, those are high temperatures right now at 3 o'clock in the afternoon in the Great Lakes, in Michigan, into Wisconsin. That's the beginning stages of a very significant trough and a cold front that's going to be pummeling southbound. And we've got a series of disturbances that are going to be trailing, producing some showers and thunderstorms. But today we've got actually some severe storms to contend with. First, out here in East Texas, where they do have a little bit of a backdoor front. So later on this evening into the overnight hours, these areas could be lighting up with scattered thunderstorms, and some of those could be on the severe side, having some quarter-size hail and definitely some downburst winds, and those are likely going to be East Texas and headed into portions of Louisiana. Further inland into portions of the Northeast, these are also going to be packing a punch in the form of high winds, and along the I-95 corridor, ideally into the DC area, places like in New Jersey, places like into Pennsylvania, that heads up into portions of Connecticut and actually into portions of Vermont and New Hampshire later on this afternoon into the evening time frame. But going into Monday, that's when the significant changes are going to be starting to occur. We're going to have a pretty significant low pressure starting to form along the Great Lakes. And that's the beginning stages of that cool down, that secondary blast of cooler air that's going to take some time, but there's going to be multiple disturbances. And as we get deeper into the week, that will actually be trending further and further south. Well, of course, we'll be watching Lee out here into the Atlantic. So let's take a look at the temperature anomalies by the time we head into Tuesday. And that's when you can start to see the cooler air really starting to take over as that ridge of high pressure backs off into Mexico. That allows the northwest flow to funnel in. That's a much cooler and colder flow, but also at the same time, we've got a series of disturbances that are going to be trailing across. That's going to be ringing out the atmosphere. That's going to be producing showers and thunderstorms within these areas that desperately need the rain. We're talking places like New Mexico, places into the panhandle of Texas, places into Oklahoma, into North Texas. That'll eventually sneak into Central Texas with much cooler air and wetter conditions for those areas. Look at the water vapor imagery on Tuesday morning. that's where the cold front will potentially be. And so it's going to be ringing out like a sponge in places like in Arizona, into Mexico, into Colorado. That fishtails down into the panhandle, goes into north and central Texas, goes into Louisiana, goes into Arkansas, those areas and portions of Kentucky, into Indiana and Ohio. And of course, there's Lee out there into the open waters just north of Puerto Rico by then. But there's the heavier rain. I mean, when's the last time you've seen like a marginal risk for excessive rainfall in these areas across the southern plains? A long time, folks. A long time. Yeah, these areas are desperately needing the rain. Bone dry conditions, extreme to exceptional drought in these areas. So they'll take all the rain they can get. And I think that's just the beginning stages of what's to come, because we'll have a series of disturbances that trail across Arizona and in New Mexico back into Texas with multiple shots. So we're going to have cold shots coming in from the Great Lakes, funneling down all the way down to the south. And then we'll have these disturbances that trail on the backside that wring out the moisture, wring out the precipitation, and much welcome soaking rains for these areas. But look at the temperature anomalies. That's a big drastic difference from the 109 and 111 today, right? You're going to be actually below average. I'm talking highs in the 80s. I mean, some of these areas could be highs in the 70s. Yeah, you hadn't even seen lows in the 70s. Now we're talking highs in the 70s. That's crazy stuff, and a dramatic flip in what you've seen as of late. And that change is going to be so welcome for these areas. Has just been begging for rain, and they're finally going to get those prayers answered, because that's the atmosphere as we go into Wednesday afternoon. We'll have yet another disturbances that come across the Four Corners regions that inundates portions of New Mexico, that travels through the Panhandle, portions of western Oklahoma, and that funnels back into North Texas as well, and eventually seeps southward into central Texas. But look what happens up here in the Northeast. I mean, Lee is well out here, right? I mean, it's still well away. This is not from anything that Lee's bringing. This is from a pretty significant trough that's really going to be building across this region, and a powerful low pressure that's also going to be bringing some high winds with this particular setup, and definitely some heavier rains across the mid-Atlantic regions and across a good part of the Northeast, as well as into New England. There's two factors that limit that's actually a good thing for Lee. So right now, obviously, it's a powerful storm. For the next 7 days, it's probably going to pulse up and pulse down, coming in and out of Category 5 type criteria. But notice what happens, right? And much cooler conditions, and that's actually compliments of the upwelling from Franklin. Remember, Franklin kind of just took its sweet time and just kind of parked itself over these same areas, kind of pulled up a lot of those cooler waters down below and rose them to the surface. So this is the same area that Lee has to go over, right? And this is the remnants of what was Idalia as well. So you got two storms, and it's traveling the same path. And so that is eventually going to be, weakening, I think, Lee, as this gets closer and closer to the East Coast and further up, closer into the Northeast. At the same time, it's going to start to feel the effects of this powerful trough that's going to be impacting these regions. So the hope is this trough is going to be strong enough to keep Lee safely offshore, and I think that's what's going to happen. So what the effects that you're going to get from into the Northeast with high winds and some heavier rains is likely not going to be coming from Lee. It's going to likely be coming from this powerful trough that's going to be impacting that region. But look what happens out west. That's something, again, you just haven't seen in a while time. We're making this transition to fall. We're not going to be that far away from fall now. So we're starting to see a lot more active period and then wetter conditions. So you're going to start seeing a lot more green on the map in the weeks ahead, and the form of cooler conditions. This is going to be really nice, folks. All those hundreds get replaced with below average temperatures, and a lot of it has to do with just the heavier rains that are going to be impacting these areas. Cloudy skies, 40, 60, 80% chances of rain for these regions. And so it's not like a deluge all at once. It's a trickle effect. So that's exactly what you need for a drought standpoint, because you want it to soak in, all right? You don't want it to come in all at once. You want that to slowly come at a, half inch a day would be perfect, right? So, and that thing, you're going to have multiple shots of rain. And I think that's going to be adding up over time. That's going to be very beneficial for next week. So here's the trough setup as we go into next weekend. And this, I mean, that's where Lee could be by next weekend. So yeah, we're talking 8 days from now, right? So we're not going to, Lee is not going to go away anytime soon. We're going to be dealing with Lee for the next 10, 11, 12 days, right? Because it's still well out there into the open waters of the Atlantic. So it's got a lot of real estate to contend with, but this is likely where it could be several hundred miles off the shore of the East Coast, because it's being picked up and pushed away from this powerful trough that's going to be impacting a good chunk of the East. And here's the latest ensemble guidance, kind of implying the same thing. Here's the European all ensemble members kind of make that turn around Tuesday, Wednesday timeframe. All of these areas keep it away from land masses and then head northbound. And then I showed you some of the cooler waters, and obviously, it kind of the spread, but most ensembles actually keep it away. There's only a few that actually even touch Maine, and then mostly go into Nova Scotia, back into Canada. And there's Margot out behind it, well, even further out into the open waters of the Atlantic. And then the GFS kind of implies the same thing on the ensemble front. You got a little bit of members, maybe a couple that try to head back, head into Maine, but most of them, like 90% of them, keep it well offshore. So I think the rains and high winds you're going to get from, into the Northeast or New England over the next week is not going to be coming from the storm. It's going to be coming from that significant, powerful trough. And you're going to be feeling the coolness, the breakdown, the massive cool down, and the rapidly changing temperatures. So you're going from like 109 in Dallas today to like high of 79 by the time we get into Tuesday. That's a 30-degree drop. That's a significant drop for September standards, and it's a noticeable feel to the body for sure after your body's been so used to the just extremely the heat in those areas. This is definitely, you've been waiting a long time for a map to look like this, and you're finally going to get it. And you're also going to get it in the form of heavier rain. So there's the culprit of the rains that could be the path, at least on the latest European guidance, keeping it well offshore. But those are the heavier rains that are going to be impacting the Great Lakes and a good part of the Mid-Atlantic, as well as into the Northeast, with those series of troughs and cold fronts impacting those regions. And then you have those multiple disturbances that come across the Four Corners regions, that come across New Mexico, that come across the Texas region, and all the way down further south, the deeper into the week we go, with beneficial rains covering almost the entire state of Texas. And that's something, again, you have not seen in a long time. And here's the, like kind of the Weather Prediction Center with multiple inches of rain. So widespread rain over time, over the next 7 days, could likely get 2, 3, possibly 4 inches of rain in portions of Oklahoma and North Texas and portions of Central Texas. And then also into portions of New Mexico and Arizona, right? I mean, Phoenix was brutal this year, right? All that record heat they had to contend with, all those record high temperatures, and now you're seeing cooler air and rains moving back in those pictures. But there's the heavier rain for the Northeast, as well. And then we're going to be transitioning to fall. And one of the things that people like to look forward to is the transition to kind of the fall foliage around this time of year, and especially heading into the beginning stages of peak fall foliage around late September up here in these regions. But you can see the map and the chart, depending on where you live in the country, where you would typically see like peak, fall foliage. And it's up here in the Northeast as you transition into October. And then as you get deeper into the October, obviously this will funnel a little bit further south. And of course, you got to go into November by the time you hit peak season, once you get down here, of course, into Texas and a good part of the Southeast as well. So definitely a transition of fall is on the way. The next week is the last full week of summer, and then of course we'll be transitioning to fall the week after that. And so big significant changes are definitely on the way. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, definitely hit the subscribe button, and catch my next update where I protect you before and after the storm.